Howdy, and welcome to the Preaching Poetry Podcast. The Preaching Poetry Podcast uses poetry to inspire conversation and to rediscover the world. Let's get to it. Howdy, welcome back. Today we're going to be reading Ode 1.11 by Horace. You should not ask, it is unholy to know, for me or for you, what ends the gods will have given, O Leuconoe, nor Babylonian calculations attempt. Much better it is, whatever will be to endure, whether more winters Jupiter has allotted, or the last which now weakens against opposing rocks, the sea Tyrrhenian. Be wise, strain your wines, and because of brief life, cut short long-term hopes. While we are speaking, envious will have fled a lifetime. Seize the day, as little as possible, trusting the future. Now, before we get too far into the meaning of this poem, I just want to make one thing very clear here. Horace wrote in Latin. This poem was not originally in English, so it is a translation, the English version that I read. I'm not going to read the Latin version because I don't know Latin well enough to read it here. But it's important for us to understand that there's going to be some license taken with this poem. When you're translating from one language to another, you kind of have to pick a philosophy. You can either translate something word for exact word, which will make it very clunky and awkward in its new language. And you can go meaning by meaning, but that is very much up to the translator's interpretation of the poem. So you may lose some of the original if you do that. And you can also kind of compromise. You can do phrase by phrase, trying to get the best of both of those, but you're still also going to have both of their weaknesses, just a little bit less so. And so I think that it's important for us to understand that this poem, if you read it in Latin, may be very different from what I just read in English. And it's important to recognize that the meanings and shades of meanings behind words change over time. And so we already know this happens with poems. Remember the word bested, right? Doesn't get used in the English language at all anymore. But you have that problem in every language, and so when you're translating poems, you have that same problem in the original language, where the way that people used Latin words changed, and you have that problem with English translations. If someone translated from the Latin into English 200 or 300 years ago, well, you're going to have the same problem in both languages. And so translation is a tricky and sticky business. If you are a proficient Latin speaker and there's some sort of shade of meaning that we're missing, and you have some help and advice to give us, by all means, please reach out on social media. Okay, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram. Connect with us, because I would love to get more information. I want to learn and grow with you guys. Okay, remember, it's not just me preaching and teaching. It's you guys, we, all of us together. We are learning from what the poetry has to say. So if anybody can help us understand what the poetry says even better, well, hey, I'd love to get that information from you. So reach out to us on social media. And the rest of you, I mean, if you really want to engage on social media, we're not going to get into Robin Williams and the Dead Poets Society today, but hey, if you want to take a picture of yourself standing on a desk and screaming, seize the day, whatever, go for it. Have fun with that. Just make sure you put hashtag preaching poetry on there. Okay, that's enough of that. We're going to move on. So let's talk about Horace himself, the author. Okay, Horace was a Roman poet and an adherent to Epicurean philosophy. Okay, so Epicurean philosophy is complex and complicated. I am not an expert in Greek and Roman philosophy. But again, I think that we'll just kind of go over the basics here. And if you've got more to add, please let us know. But the basics of Epicurean philosophy are this, that it's materialist, It is anti-superstition, disbelieving in divine intervention, and so not necessarily atheistic, but sort of this idea that, if the gods have created this world, the way that it is, they're not going to just intervene in it on random people's behalf. They're going to do what they're going to do, and there's really not much good in ritual and superstition. And so they believed that basically the material world is what there is. And the greatest good for an Epicurean was to seek essentially modest and sustainable pleasure. Overindulgence would have been bad. They would have said, well, that's really not a good thing. If you overindulge in wine, for example, you might feel good for a moment, but the hangover is going to kick your butt. And so you have to be careful. They would say, we want to enjoy and take pleasure in life, but everything in moderation. Don't overdo it, because if you overdo it, a good thing can quickly become a bad thing. And so modest and sustainable pleasure, learn to enjoy the simple things instead of seeking after the most advanced and best and wealthiest and most leisurely life that you can. No, it's learn to enjoy the leisure that you can take. Learn to enjoy the food that you can afford to eat, the wine you can afford to drink, that sort of thing. And so make sure that it's sustainable. Make sure that you can continue in this for as long as you possibly could. And so along those same lines, they would seek out tranquility and pleasure, and they would define that by the absence of bodily pain. So this goes back to even eating. An Epicurean would not say, eat as much as you want, because if you did, your stomach would hurt, and that would give you bodily pain. So a lot of the times it gets misrepresented as a sort of indulgent, sort of obsessed with physical pleasure. And that's true, but you have to understand that it's about a balance there. It's about not overdoing it, because you're seeking tranquil pleasure in every aspect of your life. So if you overdo or overindulge, well, then you're not exactly being a good Epicurean. And so the ways that you would seek out tranquility and pleasure as an Epicurean would be that you have a good knowledge of the workings of the world, so you understand the way that things work, so that you can maintain a stable, sustainable lifestyle. You understand, how much it's going to cost you to do these things, how much work it's going to take. Are you physically capable of doing those things? Learning your limits and learning the limits of the world around, but also limiting your desire. So desire gone wrong for an Epicurean can cause you more pain than a desire that is in good proportion. So Epicureanism sometimes gets kind of written off as this sort of indulgent, live for the now, blah, 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 but that's really not all of Epicureanism. Because remember, it's about seeking the greatest good in modest, sustainable pleasure. So if you live every day like it's your last, you could end up causing yourself some pretty significant pain and imbalance further down the road. Okay? So you may think, well, it doesn't hurt me to eat really unhealthy food. But in the long run, it could. It might taste really good, and it might be very pleasurable to eat a bunch of bacon. But if you do that every day, it's going to eventually cause you pain. You're going to be sick. You're going to be very overweight. You're going to have health problems. And so I think sometimes it gets misrepresented, and it's really important to understand Epicureanism as sort of limiting your desire and learning how to find balance to avoid pain, but not simply chasing after pleasure at all cost. Okay? So Horace himself was an Epicurean and a poet, and he came of age during the fall of the Republic and came to prominence as a poet under Octavian, later Augustus Caesar. Right? So Horace was the son of a banker or an investment auctioneer. It's kind of hard to figure out. Sources kind of disagree. He served in the Roman legions on the side of the Republic after the assassination of Julius Caesar. And when we say that, we basically mean on the side of the Senate. Okay? If you don't know your Roman history, the Senate lost, which is why we have Octavian becoming Augustus Caesar. Okay? And so Caesar, Augustus, becomes the princeps, the first citizen, taking over the Republic and basically recreating it in his own image, as a republic in name, but not necessarily in function. And so, because he was on the losing side, his ancestral home and estates were seized to pay Caesar's retired legions. So the armies who fought, against the Senate on the side of Antony and Octavian, those armies needed to get paid. And, well, the easiest way to do that was to seize all of the people who opposed you, seize their stuff, and use it to pay them off. So Horace became destitute overnight and became a poet and made a very powerful friend in a man named Maecenas, who was a political advisor to Octavian. And again, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but I might not be. And so because he had a very powerful friend who later became a political advisor to the emperor, Horace managed to obtain a cushy government job that made him some extra money. He didn't have to do a whole lot. And then he was later gifted a large farm with tenants by this same guy, Maecenas. And so it becomes really easy to become a prolific and well-written poet when you don't have to work for a living, right? When you don't have to spend all of your time working your day job, it's a lot easier to have the time and the energy to write. And so because he was able to sort of rebuild his fortunes, Horace didn't have to work for his money, so he spent his time as a poet. And so the truth of it is that poetry has never paid terribly well, and that's why we all need a day job. And so, my day job, I'm an educator. I teach in an elementary school. And so that's my day job. Podcasting is a lot like poetry. It doesn't pay very well. I mean, for some people, maybe it does, but we'll see if we ever get there. So enough about Horace. So let's go back to the poem. Okay, the poem, the ode. And he starts with an admonition. Horace says, "It is unholy to know the future." Now, remember, he's an Epicurean, so he's very distrustful of superstition, of astrology, of prophecy. Okay, he talks about Babylonian calculations, right? And so Babylon was an ancient capital of the Babylonian Empire. It's sort of that Eastern religion, Eastern mysticism that the Romans really thought was not very manly, not very good, it wasn't virtuous. And so, calling these Babylonian calculations, basically he's saying it's the cult. It's a cult. You're superstitious. You're reading tarot cards. You're going to a palm reader. He said it's unholy to try to figure out the future in those ways. And so, the Romans disdained that sort of superstition. And as an Epicurean, Horace would have he would have agreed with that. He would have definitely been in that camp, maybe even more than most. And so he mentions the word Leuconoe, right? It is unholy for me or for you to know, O Leuconoe. And so Leuconoe could be a real person. There's a lot of disagreement about this sort of thing. It could be that she was a real person, a woman, most certainly, who Horace is speaking to. The name indicates that she might have been a slave. Other ideas behind who this person is he's talking to, who Leuconoe is that she could be his lover. She could be a servant, a priestess, a prophetess, right? Because she wants to do these sort of, superstitious figuring it out. Personally, I think she's just kind of an imaginary interlocutor to serve a function in this poem. She's just a convenient person that he is responding to. And the reason I think this is because the name seems to be a little bit symbolic, right? So the word Leuconoe is actually a sort of combined, it's a combined word from two other words. So leukos and nos. Okay, so you have these two other words, these two other Greek words, I believe, leukos and nos. Leukos means white or pure, and nos means mind or thought. Okay, and so if you put those two together, you have a pure mind, right? So I think it's kind of interesting that the name of the person he's talking to is the pure mind, the pure-minded person. And so perhaps Leuconoe was a real person. Perhaps she was, this is a scene from his ordinary life, talking to his lover or his friend. But I think she serves as a sort of stand-in for us, right? Those of pure mind. And so, therefore, if Leuconoe is a sort of embodied representation of people who are pure of mind, then we need to understand that the enlightened thinkers are going to listen to what Horace says, right? If we are going to have white minds or pure minds or, illuminated thought, that's important, okay, to understand. I think that what Horace is trying to say is this is the way to be pure of mind. I think he's reverting back to a sort of Epicurean teaching here. He says, it is better to suffer what will be rather than to anticipate it, to try and manipulate it, right? You can spend all of your time looking into the future, planning for every eventuality, and most of them will never come to pass. And you could spend all of your time trying to figure out what the future's going to hold and how it's going to bring. And you could break every decision you ever make down by trying to anticipate the future, by trying to manipulate the future. But Horace says, no, that's not the way that the enlightened, pure of mind do things. Okay, I keep going back to some of these other teachers of antiquity. We've mentioned him quite a bit so far, but Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, he says in that sermon, he'll say that you should let tomorrow worry about itself, that each day has enough trouble of its own for us to deal with. Okay, and I think that Horace would agree with that in this very Epicurean sense that you can cause yourself a lot of problems and pain and imbalance trying to anticipate the future, but that instead it's much better to resolve to endure what will come. So if the suffering comes, then we will deal with it and we will attempt to try to make the best of whatever comes our way, but we're not going to spend all of our time living in fear of what may be, but what we don't know for sure will come. He says, if we have many years or just one winter left, it shouldn't change anything about how we live. Right? So it's the powerful image here of a man who knows what the good life is. He knows what it's about. Horace knows, and he's already living it. He doesn't have to worry about his future because he is capable of enduring. He already is living the best life that he can. There's no reason to go around messing with things, especially when you don't have any real control over them. So Horace paints himself as this picture of the guy who knows what life is about. Okay? It's very Epicurean here. And he doesn't recommend ignoring the future and living only in the immediate present, but instead he advises his readers to be aware that time slips away, right? While we are speaking, envious will have fled a lifetime. So we're wasting our time talking about this future, and we're missing out on our opportunity to live our best life in the present. It's a pretty compelling thing to think, right? LeBron James once said that, I treated every day like it was my last day with a basketball. And when you look at a guy who basically has basketball on lockdown, one of the greatest of all time. I know there's a debate about it, and you may be on that side. You may no Kobe or no Jordan, whatever. LeBron is one of the greatest men to ever handle the ball. That's essentially, that's not up for debate. We can definitely say he's one of the all-time greats. But a man like that says, I treated every day like it was my last day with a basketball. And so doing as much as you can to be as good as you can in that moment. He wasn't sitting there on the bench thinking about championships, thinking about rings, thinking about the legacy. No, he was focused. He was in the moment. And I would imagine that a lot of top tier athletes would tell you the same thing, man. You can't, if you stop to think about how you're losing the game or winning the game or whatever, you're distracting yourself from the right now. If you're in the Super Bowl and you're the quarterback and you're too busy thinking about what's going to happen if you win or lose this game, you're not going to be playing your best game. And it's the same with life. If we spend all of our time trying to manipulate and control the future, all of that time that we waste is time that we will never get back. So what if we treated every day that we were at work, okay, like this was the last day we were going to get to be there? And I don't mean in a burn the place down and run away. I mean in an Epicurean way, right? What if we treated every day like this was our last chance to make as much of a difference as we could, to invest as much of ourselves as we could, to be completely present, to enjoy our work, but to be invested in it too? What if we did that in our relationships? Right? Like, what if you treated every day that you got to spend with your kids like this was the last day you'd get to see them? Not in a doom and gloom, it's the end of the world, but would you make sure that you apologized? Would you repair the breaches in the relationship? Would you make sure to tell people you love them? Would you go out of your way to do what's in their best interest? What if we did this in our relationships? What if you treated your significant other, your husband or wife or girlfriend, boyfriend, spouse, partner, whoever, friends even? What if we treated every day like this was the last day that we were going to get to spend with that person? What if we lived every day to its fullest capacity? It's a pretty powerful idea. So Horace goes on to say, be wise, strain the wine, and cut back long hope. Now, what does it mean to strain the wine? This is not something that we do. I've opened bottles of wine, many of them, and you just used a little corkscrew. Wow, when I said many of them, I'm afraid some of y'all are going to think I'm some sort of raging wino. No, but you know how it is. I've lived long enough to have opened a bottle of wine or two in my time. Okay, never mind. Moving on. Straining wine, we don't have to do it today. Okay. We really don't. You can pour it out of the bottle without having to worry about catching a bunch of junk in your glass. But in Horace's day, you would strain the wine through a cloth or strainer to get rid of all of the chunky, sedimented, little bits of grape and plants and vines that gets left over in the barrels, in the pitcher of wine. And you would have to do that so that you didn't end up with all of the extra stuff. All right? So he says, be wise, strain the wine, and cut back long hopes. So he says, basically, do what's practical in this moment. Do the best thing that you can to improve your situation now. He's like, if you spend all of your time trying to strain all of the wine, you're never going to get any of it drunk today. If you spend all of your time thinking about and digging and building and preparing a vineyard, what does it matter? Instead, make the most of the opportunity that you have in front of you right now and take pleasure in the simple things. This is Epicurean. Do the best practical thing you can to bring yourself a simple and modest pleasure today. And learn to take joy and pleasure in a life well lived and virtuous in the moment. This sort of practical wisdom is really beneficial to us. Okay? And this kind of wisdom should not be neglected to try to discern the future. He says, while we speak, time slips on. Envious time. Perhaps Horace even believes that rich possibilities have been bypassed merely by having this conversation. Or maybe he's talking about the time that we're taking to read the poem, or the time he's taking to write the poem. I don't know. Of course, others think that he is trying to seduce Leuconoe, and, while we are speaking, envious will have fled a lifetime. While you've been trying to figure out all these Babylonian calculations, we could have been enjoying ourselves with this wine, Leuconoe. Maybe. But I think when we look at the very last line, right? Seize the day, as little as possible, trusting the future. You've got to remember, Horace was an Epicurean. So that carpe diem, that's seizing the day, it sounds like a violent thing. It sounds like an expression of power and might. But the truth is, that word carpe, seize, is probably not the best translation of it. Now, it's certainly one way to translate the word, but there is a pretty significant school of thought here that the word carpe is not meant as in a sort of grasping, straining, swiping at the day, but that instead the word is associated with the harvest. Not by seizing something frantically, but kind of like plucking it like an apple, pulling it off the tree. And carpe also means to make good use of, or to enjoy it. Okay? Remember, Epicureans valued restraint. Don't overuse the day, but make the best use of today that you can. Don't grasp at it. Don't try to kidnap the day. That's not what we're talking about, but pluck it like an apple. It's there for you to have. Pull it off of the vine like you pull a grape off of the vine. It's there in front of you. Take a hold of it. Don't waste it. Not in a frantic sort of, this may be the last chance you ever have to do anything sort of way, but making the best use of the time that you have. There really is a balance we have to remember here, because this was Epicurean, right? Making the best use of what you can today, but not causing yourself an imbalance, not causing yourself pain, but finding sustainable and tranquil pleasure in what you have. Now, I don't know what it would look like for you to pluck the day, to take a hold of the day, to go into the fridge, open up the door and pull out the day and open it up and get started. To peel the day like a banana when you eat your breakfast. I don't know what that would look like for you. But I can tell you one thing. My day always seems to be a better day when I make good use of it. When I waste my time, when I spend too much time, goofing off, I don't feel good about myself. I don't feel good about my day. And if I spend my entire day frantically trying to get as much done as possible, well, I don't usually feel very good about that day either. So I think learning to find that balance, learning to find that sustainability, what is a pace of life that I can accomplish and feel well accomplished, but where I don't burn and wear myself out. See, I don't know what that will look like for you. But I hope that through Horace's poem here, we're able to capture a little bit of that idea. And maybe we can sort of recreate our days. We can rewrite our own stories by plucking the day, by taking advantage and making the best use of here and now and what we have, instead of worrying about what we don't know. I don't know. What do you think? Thank you for listening to the Preaching Poetry Podcast. I hope that you enjoyed your time with us, and we look forward to having you back for more. If you like what you heard, please be sure to leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe. If you're looking for more content, you can find us on Apple, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, basically anywhere you find podcasts. If you want to join our community or just want to get in touch with us, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Preaching Poetry.